Now, as tensions ramp up at the Russia-Ukraine border, Western leaders continue to pursue a two-pronged approach to de-escalation. One is to increase military assistance to Ukraine, and the second is to continue full diplomatic efforts to defuse the crisis. Now, in the latest, Ukraine has urged Moscow to pull back its troops from Ukraine's border and continue talking to the West if it is serious about resolving the situation. Remember, Russia has deployed over 100,000 troops in heavy armor along Ukraine's border, sparking fears of a Russian invasion. The United States and Britain too stepped up efforts to keep Moscow under pressure, saying that new devastating sanctions are being prepared against Russian individuals. US senators said that they are very close to reaching a deal on sanctioning Russia, including some measures that may take effect before any invasion. This is because of actions Russia has already taken, like cyber attacks or their efforts to undermine the Kyiv government. The Senate bill will also target the most significant Russian banks and Russian sovereign debt, as well as provide more US military assistance to Ukraine. Analysts say that such sanctions hitting Russian banks and financial institutions could not only affect daily life throughout Russia, but also major economies in Europe and elsewhere. In London, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said that Britain would unveil sanctions legislation next week that would target a much wider variety of Russian economic targets. With tensions rising, Canadian Defence Minister Anita Anand landed in Kyiv for an official visit. Anand announced Canadian forces in Ukraine were being moved west for their protection and that it was temporarily withdrawing all non-essential employees from its Kyiv embassy. Relations between Russia and the West are at their lowest point since the Cold War, but Russia has maintained that it does not want the West want a war with the West. And in fact, let's just listen into the latest comments from Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Здесь иллюзий нет. Мы хотим добрых, ровных, взаимоуважительных, равноправных отношений с Соединенными Штатами, как и с любой другой страной мира. Об этом президент. И научные горьким опытом мы не хотим оставаться в положении, когда наша безопасность просто ущемляется повседневно.
Russia says that it wants respectful and equal relations with the world, and yet Russian state TV showed country's new Sukhoi fighter jets being deployed in the Kaliningrad region. The 4 fighter jets will be part of the Russian Baltic Fleet. As tensions simmer, Russia has launched military drills across multiple fronts, including close ally Belarus. Remember, Russia has demanded the withdrawal of NATO from its borders in Eastern Europe and a promise that Ukraine will not be allowed to join the military alliance. And for more on this, we're now being joined live by our correspondent Stuart Smith from Moscow. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us. Ukraine has urged Moscow to pull back troops. You know, the United States and Britain, they are stepping up their efforts as well. This also happens in the backdrop of Canadian Defence Minister Anita Anand, who's in Kyiv for an official visit. What can you tell us about the latest on this?
Well, the focus today is on the United Kingdom, which is due to pass a law which would allow the government to sanction Russia for any invasion of Ukraine, and notably people not directly related to the invasion of Ukraine, but simply oligarchs, influential figures, those with vast financial resources who keep their funds in the United Kingdom and have influence, or as the UK government would believe, would have influence against the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. London has long been known as a home for foreign funds, and one British parliamentary report called it, in effect, a laundromat for Russian dirty money, sometimes dubbed Londongrad. And so this would be an attempt by the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss to try to provide another source of leverage to discourage Russia from taking action in Ukraine, which of course it continues to deny. Also today, there's a United Nations Security Council meeting, including of course the United States and Russia. Not much is likely to come of that in terms of concrete decisions, because any decision or discussion unfavourable to Russia would be vetoed. However, it does show the United States' attempt to try to bring this issue to the world stage and potentially later force a vote on the issue.
Right, Stuart. Now, talking of the ramped up efforts to pressurize Moscow, there are sanctions that are being prepared as well. What can you tell us about the ramifications of this and Moscow's response to the same?
Well, Russia doesn't believe that sanctions are ever a useful tool to try and incentivize political action. It much prefers talks. Of course, it is frequently the country on the receiving end of sanctions, especially from the United States, and has been for many years. This is no stranger of a situation to Moscow, and frequently, including most recently from Dmitry Medvedev, an ex-president of Russia, they're brushed off. He says they have no effect. Russia's used to sanctions. More sanctions will make no difference. What they will do is only alienate the situation, alienate Russia and make the situation worse. In terms of what's actually being considered for Russia, indeed, the United States potentially looking at sanctions ahead of an invasion, which Ukraine has asked for from the United States. In terms of what could be targeted, well, technology that the United States sends to Russia is one likely candidate. Financial institutions, members of President Putin's top team, and even potentially the president himself. Now, Russia, in reaction to that, said it would effectively be cutting off all diplomatic ties with the United States if it should go ahead and sanction the president. Russia is not keen on this, of course, as a way forward. It's still looking for further talks, both with Western leaders and Western ministers. But there is also the risk, as we know from before, that Russia said it would take military technical measures if its demands weren't met, which means the West is effectively waiting to see what Russia will do.
Right. Now, Stuart, talking about the way forward, what can you also tell us about the deployment of the country's new Sukhoi fighter jets to the Kaliningrad region and the multiple military drills on multiple fronts? How do you see this impacting the current situation?
That's right. Now, the most important military drill going on right now, because there are multiple, is the one to the north of Ukraine in Belarus, a joint military drill with Belarus. The Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, has said there's no intention for Belarus to attack Ukraine either with these joint Russian forces, and the only thing that would happen is potentially war if Belarus or Russia is attacked. But it's a further point of weakness for Ukraine, with Kyiv only around 100 kilometers far south of the Belarusian border. And so those drills are being heavily watched by NATO, especially because Belarus itself borders NATO countries like Poland, like Lithuania. And so those countries are concerned any Russian Belarus drills could extend further west. Kaliningrad, of course, also next to Lithuania. So drills taking place very close to NATO allies, which is different to Ukraine, of course, because Ukraine's not in NATO. And that's why many troops are being sent east, or promises of troops to be sent east are taking place amongst NATO members to try and provide, as the UN Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said, provide that support to Eastern European nations, make them sure that they know they are protected.
Right. All right, Stuart, thank you so much for joining us with all the updates on this. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.